Well, welcome back to Alan's Day. This is part two of the radiator going in this 2005 Holiday Rambler. Part one, I was just showing you a little bit about the radiator. This episode we're going to put the shroud in and just do a final inspection before we drop that radiator in. Because once that radiator is in here, it's going to be difficult to get at some of these things. So let me get you in here and show you a couple things to check for before we tidy this thing up. Well, I've got the fan installed, and I've got the serpentine belt put in there. Fan installed, and Taz, the garage cat's out here to help me as always. I took and made sure that the AC belt was in good shape, and I cleaned up the adjustments and oiled the adjusters for the AC pump here so that it's free if you ever have to do it out on the side of the road. One other thing I did is made sure that the serpentine belt was good. This one's only got a couple thousand miles on, so it's good. But also what I recommend while you're in here is the alternator. Take that out and have that tested by one of your local alternator shops. They'll let you know what kind of shape it is and check the bearings out. And at that same time, you need to get yourself a spare alternator to throw in the side box or throw on in one of the cabinets there. If you're out on the road and this particular alternator goes, you could be out there for a couple of weeks. This alternator is no longer available. It was made exclusively for Monaco coaches. Well, after all that work getting everything prepped, the radiator is finally ready to go in. And let me just show you before I drop the radiator in there. We've got that mount that I made up. I showed you that earlier. Now this mount is set in here on some rubber bushings, and you need to leave this mount somewhat flexible. Well, we've got our 1/8 inch rubber pad set in there, neoprene pads, and you can see that the radiator is going to sit down in these slots here. On the bottom of the radiator there's some nubs sticking out that are approximately 1/4 inch high. The neoprene's only an 1/8 inch high, so you've got some flex ability in there for that radiator just to float just a little bit in those slots without coming out. It's real critical that there's a little bit of flex and movement in that radiator when you set it in here. And a couple other things that I did in here, and I showed you that before, is I put those slots on the bottom side of this of the fan shroud here, and I've got these bolts welded through, so you can just set the shroud over the top of those bolts and tighten it up, and you don't have little bolts to get in there. Otherwise, the only way to get that out otherwise is you got to stick your hand through here, down around, hold a wrench on there to try to get at that when the radiator's in here. And well, last look at this, you can see my spray jets pointing all the way in here, and we will get some water hooked up on those later on, and we'll see how it works. One other thing, don't be afraid to write notes on things. For instance, before I pulled this radiator out of, the fan out of here, I just pulled on here that this side is to the rear, and then it's a 15 millimeter wrench to get out those. And more notes in here. You can see that I've got the belt sizes that we need in here for the serpentine belt and the AC belt, and then also the pattern as far as how the configuration of how the belt is set up here. Because when you're laying upside down at night with a bad busted belt, it sure would be nice to know how that goes back in there if it ever blew off there. And just for more notes on how to take out the adjust the AC belt on there and what size wrenches to use. So lots of notes. Don't be afraid to write on stuff. Well, I will bring you back once the radiator is dropped in there. Well, I've got the radiator set down in here, and you can see that it's everything lines up, sits in the slots there. But what I'm going to do in here is any place that it may come in contact with metal, and also to help center that radiator in there, just going to take a piece of 1/4 inch rubber. I put some Bostic adhesive in there. You've seen me use that on other and then I'm just going to drop that down in here. I don't know if you can see me put it down in there. Well, one of the biggest problems I had when I originally took this intercooler and radiator out of here was getting at these 3 bolts that are located on the top of the intercooler. They originally built the coach around the intercooler and radiator, and you can see that by they actually had the notch out for the bolt heads in order to put this in here. And the only way to get this out of here is I had to cut the bolts off with a grinding disc to be able to get this out of here. Somebody wasn't thinking when they put this together. So the way I fixed that was I added this extension plate on here, and I moved the mounting holes out to the front here, and then I put some weld nuts on the inside right in 3 places. That way I just go on the inside, lift up the hatch in the back closet of the coach, and I can get down in there, take those 3 bolts out, and the intercooler is ready to slide back. Also what I did is I put weld nuts down on the inside of every place that there was a nut. So that way you do not need 2 wrenches to get any of the bolts off the system. So it's a combination of fixing the top mount, putting weld nuts in there, slotting the bottom side of the fan shroud, and now I could probably get this out of here a half hour, 45 minutes or an hour. I can have this out of the unit here compared to taking a good part of a day to get it out before the way they originally had it set up. So, well, I will get the intercooler in here and start bolting her up. Well, I'm back. The point I'm at right now is I'm back on the inside of the motorhome, and I'll show you how I have the top of the intercooler mounted. These are the 3 locations that I showed you before where the bracket is that I made that fits on top of the intercooler. So that way when it comes time to ever take this out of here, take the bolts out and I can actually get at them. Otherwise, previously the way Monaco had them set up, they were underneath in these 3 spots, and that's where I said I had to, the only way to get the bolts out of there is I had to saw the bolts out of there. So a whole lot easier now. I'll take you around to the other side and show you the front mount. So I've got to do a little upgrading on them. Well, I'm back on the outside the coach here. Next step of the process here is put the brackets in here. When this was originally built, there's 2 channels that mount the back side of the radiator and intercooler in place. And the only problem with that is you can see right here, down in here, the radiator goes back in there a couple of inches yet. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take and cut this bracket off and then reinforce it so that I can gain a little more surface area. And I calculated it out, and I gained 64 square inches of airspace that I paid for on this radiator to let coolant through. Otherwise, what happens is the bracket that Monaco put on there blocks off a portion of the radiator on each side. So I will bring you back when I have this bracket all welded and cleaned up. You can see that I took and I cut this all the way through here. Well, these are the brackets that hold the radiator in place, and you can see the notches I cut out and the reinforcement that I put on the sides there. Painted them up. I'll let them dry and get them put in tomorrow morning. Talk to you guys later. Well, the radiator's in. Got everything all tidied up in here. I've got all the new mounts on here, or the modified mounts that get a little bit more air in here. The power steering reservoir, I've got that attached. A couple things I did on this. Originally, the factory had these brackets welded onto the mount here. I cut those off and I turned that into a bolted connection. That way you can take this power steering reservoir off separate. One thing I like to do is leave myself lots of notes. So for instance, this is the oil that I use in there. I just simply cut the label off of one of the quarts of oil, and I put in here when I changed it, and a few other notes that I've got in here. Like I said, I showed you before that I've got all my belt information up top there. And then I also, I don't know if you can see it down in there, but that's the antifreeze that I use. It's a final charge global. I'll show you a little more on that in a second. I did change out the filter checker. This tells you how much vacuum is getting drawn on the system. I've got one other thing to do before I put coolant in the system, and that is I'm going to put some shutoff valves for the heater hose that go all the way up to the front of the coach here. I'm going to put one of these shutoff valves as close to the motor as possible with the intake and the return on there. That way, if there's ever a problem when you're out on the road where you've got one of the coolant lines that are leaking going all the way to the front, and there's probably over 50-60 feet of line there, some of it I can't get at, that you can simply go in there and shut the valve, and at least you're back on the road again and you're not going to lose all your coolant. So little safety precaution, shut off valves for your heater core. Also, the hose that I've replaced, everything I could get my hands on to change it, I change out and I use this silicone heater hose. This is all a 5/8 hose. I replaced. Well, this is the end of part 2, putting the radiator in this 2005 Monaco motorhome. Got the radiator set. There's a few more projects I got to do. This has been a winter project. I've had this in here for a couple months now, doing some other things that I'll go back around and show you, working with the transmission cooler, air cleaner, just getting it prepped and ready for a road trip. So, thank you for watching, and we will get you some more videos on upgrade to perfect on this motorhome here. Talk to you guys later. And also Taz says goodbye. Thank you for watching Alan's Day. Life is about making choices. Some things are already perfect. Some things you may choose to upgrade. This channel will show you both. Please like, subscribe, and share. Thanks again.